Okay, so for those of you who don't know sign language, did reading that help? Of course, because without an interpreter translating my signs into spoken English, your only resort to understand what I'm saying is reading the words in this slide. Reading allows us to learn more about each other. We can learn about virtually anything through reading. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the love affairs of Lady Chatterley, and how to make a souffle. And yet, reading is increasingly underrated ritual. And I wish I didn't have to say that. I wish I didn't really have to say that. Now, I know my generation isn't that big on reading. We're more about tweeting, living vicariously through people on Facebook, and watching reality shows starring pernicious housewives. I'll admit, I do indulge in those vices, but reading is still my first love. It's rare for a love story to start in pre-kindergarten, and this is how it goes. It started in pre-K. We had the customary nap time, which wasn't really my cup of tea. Luckily, one day, my teacher told me I didn't have to do nap time anymore. Instead, she took me into her office. She had piles of thin books, vocabulary cards, and colorful pictures of everyday things. Though I didn't know the word for it, I knew I felt like the cartoon man sketch above the word. Excited. It was right there in my teacher's office where I learned how to read. Learning to read for me was a fascinating process. Unless you know someone who is deaf, you've probably never even considered how an audible language can be taught visually. In this process, she took me through 4 steps. For instance, my teacher showed me a drawing of a hairy beast. Then, letter by letter, she spelled the corresponding word beneath in English and ASL. After learning how to spell it, she taught me the sign. Finally, I made the connection between the written word, the picture, the finger spelling, and ultimately the sign. I could now call the beast by name, a dog. And that was essentially the foundation for my reading skills. But there's one crucial thing missing, my own voice. What I mean by this is I was mechanically competent in writing. It was too precise, devoid of any naturally occurring humanity that is so apparent in everybody's voice, both spoken and written. But what I created was to express myself as authentically as possible through writing, which at that point was tricky, seeing as I couldn't hear organic conversations and imable thought organicity through my writing. Fortunately, I discovered the children's book series, A Series of Unfortunate Events, by Lemony Snicket's in the 3rd grade. It's about the Baudelaire orphans who lost their parents in a terrible fire, and now a wicked man, Count Olaf, is trying to steal their enormous fortune. Snicket's writing style is quite distinctive, a word here which means easily recognizable due to the author's affinity for humorously defining his large vocabulary in the middle of the story. And he had those huge words put in there for children. Words such as you can see all these different kind of words, penultimate, standoffish, words that children wouldn't normally know unless they read the dictionary recreationally. As you can see there. I also immediately took Snicket's conversational style where he talked directly to the reader, albeit to persuade him or her to stop reading or to go off on some rambling bit about his complicated life. This was what I'd been looking for, a likable, humorously bitter, and wise voice. So for the next few years, I became some sort of a parrot, mimicking Snicket's voice in my writing. It was a matter of figuring out how to find my own perspective, based on, let's call it a muse. With each book I could get my grubby hands on, a new dimension was added to my prism. One day, I'd see the world through the eyes of a cynical New Yorker, David Sedaris, where a horrible incident could be recounted as a darkly funny anecdote. The next day, I'd see the world through Jay Gatsby's eyes, as a place to never lose hope when it comes to unrequited love. Eventually, my perspective became an amalgamation of the books I've read over the years. Reading the conversations in these books was where I found a natural rhythm. That rhythm then fermented from reading the closed captioning on TV shows like 30 Rock and Seinfeld with the cascade of rapid-fire wordplay. This led me to the humanity I longed for in my writing, with a solid understanding of the art of conversation and how wordplay is instrumental in building an appreciative relationship with English. I found my voice. So throughout this journey, I never stopped reading. I read to learn about the world. The value of reading comes from the power of information. I read to rid myself of ignorance. With the education of deaf not up to par, I found it an obligation to read and continue learning, not to come across as an insufferable know-it-all, but to show how much I want to know. It's like planting a seed in a conversation at the beginning. By just sharing a drop of knowledge, I can find a tangent that leads to new information. That budding notion would soon be a branch on my tree of knowledge. Now, I'm not a scientist nor a world-renowned psychologist, but from my experiences with conversing with other people, when you share something you know, you stimulate the other person's brain, and there will be a mutually beneficial exchange of new revelations, mundane or revolutionary. For my hearing cohorts, don't take for granted your ability to hear, to unconsciously absorb information without actively pursuing it. I have to pursue it all the time. This is not a burden for me. It's actually a blessing. What was handed to me, I want it for myself with a passion. I have a purpose. It's why I get out of bed every morning, lusting for novelty, whereas the adage goes, there's a whole world out there waiting for you. I started exploring that world by remaining in one place with the greatest ticket ever, a book. Where people struggle to find the meaning of life, I find the meaning in the struggle. Reading isn't a task, it's a way of life for me. I'm August Shitama, and I hope you'll find your ticket. Thank you very much.